The story begins above the greenish planet of Sereno. The Republic is leading a massive planetary-scale attack on the planet, but it wasn't easy by any means. Sereno was one of the most secured Separatist planets in the galaxy. The Republic was taking massive losses. Below, Dooku was looking at the sky, drinking a glass of wine. He could barely believe it. What happened to the Jedi? Are they really so far gone as to initiate an offensive attack on a planet buzzing with security droids? That was a surprise. Dooku sipped the last drop of his wine and turned. It was time to take some shelter, just in case. Above, Windu was in his starfighter. The pilots of the 187th Battalion were right behind him. They dodged the incoming bolts. They weren't taking any strategic path, and that was because they were just the distraction. Anakin Skywalker, leading the 501st, was storming toward the planet vertically, as fast as possible. The quicker they got into the atmosphere, the better. The 501st pilots around him were falling every second, but nonetheless they pressed on, and they did finally enter the atmosphere. The danger wasn't over, but they were flying low, toward the Count's castle. Many good men had been lost. That's why Anakin was even more determined to finish this once and for all. Finally, Dooku's castle was seen in the distance. Suddenly, dozens of Hyena-class bombers appeared from all sides. Anakin flipped around, reduced thruster power, and shot at the incoming bombers. Clone pilots did the same, but many weren't quite as lucky. ARC-170s weren't exactly as maneuverable as the Eta II Actis-class interceptor Anakin was flying. Now, it was just Anakin and 4 clone pilots. They shot down the remaining bombers and finally touched down at Dooku's castle entrance. It was quiet. Too quiet. Although Anakin liked the sudden change, many great men had been lost. Anakin started out with 32 elite clone pilots of the 501st Battalion, and he was down to 4 now. He had to make it worth it. He climbed out of his starfighter, gazing at the ridiculously shaped castle in front of him. He knew the castle was full of traps, but there was a great chance that Dooku was somewhere in there. Besides, reinforcements were on their way. At least Anakin hoped so. He had to arrest Dooku here and now. After all, this whole operation was his idea. Anakin argued with the Council as always. He told them that to win this war, their ideals would have to be bent. That massive actions had to be taken to prevent further suffering. And surprisingly, the Council agreed. Although, to Anakin's surprise, Palpatine really did not like the idea. He always told him that the Jedi are not ready to do what's necessary to defeat the Separatists. But Palpatine just said that an operation like this is way too risky. What Anakin didn't know is that Palpatine contacted Tyrannus immediately after that. He told him to evacuate from the planet, but Dooku proposed a different idea. He just wouldn't do anything about it. Sereno is one of the most secure planets in the galaxy. The losses the Jedi will take will greatly outweigh the wins. What Dooku didn't quite know is that Anakin Skywalker himself was making his way toward him at that very moment. So Anakin entered the dimly lit castle. The greenish glow was the only thing illuminating the tight hallways. Anakin wondered why Dooku needed this massive castle, while everything inside felt so underwhelming. Nonetheless, he and the 4 troopers made their way to the throne room. It was completely empty, so they advanced, blasters and lightsaber ready. They advanced through the tiny corridors toward the underground area of the castle. The biggest part of the castle was deep inside the foundations, far underground. Anakin knew the castle was swarming with traps, but it was an educated risk. What is one more anyway? So, they advanced, checking the rooms, until, in one of the biggest dining halls underground, they finally found Dooku. And his Magna Guards, of course. Anakin knew that the more time they wasted on the Magna Guards, the worse it would be. He needed to get Dooku out into the hallways, now. So he instructed the clones to deal with the Magna Guards. They knew it wouldn't be an easy task, but they'd try their best. So Dooku ignited his saber and slowly stood up. Anakin attacked. Dooku, of course, parried with his surgical precision. But this fight wouldn't be like the others, Anakin decided. Dooku was different. He was frustrated. He didn't expect Anakin would make it past his defenses, so he was the one attacking now. He advanced. Anakin retreated to the hallway and then to the stairs. Dooku was struggling. Anakin was usually the one advancing, especially upwards. But Dooku didn't want this Jedi slime anywhere near his castle, so they got into the throne room. Dooku was getting impatient, but he had a plan. He got Anakin to the middle of the huge room, and then he pressed a button. Around Anakin formed a ray-shielded area. Dooku smiled. The Magna Guards now ran toward Dooku. The clones had also lost, but suddenly the glass behind Anakin shattered, and clone troopers crashed through the glass into the room. Dooku pushed them back with all of his strength, sending them flying hard back through the shattered windows and to their deaths. But now the second wave followed. Clone troopers first, but behind them, Windu and Plo Koon leapt into the room. Dooku lifted his saber. Does he attempt to flee, or the decision was made for him? Behind him, he heard a grunt he could recognize anywhere. "Over it is, Dooku. Surrender you must." So Dooku nobly lifted his hands, accepting his defeat. As Dooku was arrested, Windu deactivated the ray shield, and so Plo Koon, Skywalker, and Windu started walking toward the deeper layers of the castle. The troopers of the 187th scanned every detail of the area. Before the Jedi could enter the tight corridors, they were confronted by 4 Royal Magna Guards. They looked at each other before igniting their sabers and slicing through them. As they advanced into the deeper levels, they found a central communication area. They tried accessing data pads, but everything was encrypted. Clone tech specialists moved in and started decrypting the massive logs of data. It would take a while to decrypt everything. The data pads would probably need to be transported back to Coruscant, but something was obvious almost immediately. Dooku was working for Sidious, and Sidious was the Chancellor. The Jedi couldn't believe it. Chancellor Palpatine was the Sith Lord. They would need a while to process that. But Windu also asked the troopers to inspect something else. When they entered the room before, Windu saw some strange text, something to do with Order 99. So clones easily identified what he was talking about. According to decrypted data, Order 99 was a military command designed to give battle droids sentience, free will. Why an order like that was in place was not yet understood, although Windu couldn't see anything bad about executing the order right now. Clone tech experts urged Windu that they must take the data back to Coruscant to understand the entire nature of the military order. But Windu just said that if they do that, the order might prove ineffective. The Separatists will shut down Dooku's communication channels to prevent any Republic interference. They need to do this here and now. So, after some thinking, Windu did indeed give the command to execute Order 99, and suddenly, quintillions of battle droids throughout the galaxy stopped fighting. Droids in CIS camps mostly just sat down, thinking about their next move. Many droids on the battlefield kept fighting, or fled the battlefield. Many didn't receive the order immediately. Some were disconnected from any form of communication, trapped on different planets, fighting brutal battles, holding positions. But more and more droids around the galaxy received the order. The galaxy was in shock. The droids didn't act predictably. They had a sort of crisis of identity. So Windu determined that it was time for them to return to Coruscant. Many clone troopers and Republic droids stayed behind to deeply study every tiny bit of the castle. Anything they could extract from this palace could help in their war efforts. But the most important things were already discovered: the encrypted data pads, and the Jedi returned to Coruscant. The data pads were left with the Chancellor's office and his team of tech experts. Although obviously nothing from those data pads would ever see the light of day again. Masa Meta would take care of that. Palpatine knew he could trust him. Palpatine, meanwhile, had to flee. After the Battle of Serenno, the Chancellor apparently just disappeared, which was to be expected. Reports were coming in from all around the galaxy. Droids had stopped fighting. Some even offered to negotiate with Republic battalions, although clones were very cautious. The Council held many meetings, but there was always more to discuss. Dooku was Palpatine's apprentice. Separatist droids had developed apparent consciousness, and that could not be ignored. These droids were completely free of all their programming. They needed to proceed extremely cautiously. They did not want to form another galactic faction because they failed to act accordingly, so the Council discussed. Windu said their highest priority right now was to keep the Senate intact. A new Chancellor would soon be elected. The senators were terrified by the revelation that Palpatine was the Sith Lord. Their second highest priority was sorting out the mess with the droid army. So the Jedi went to the Senate. The Senate was discussing the withdrawal of emergency powers and how the power transfer to the next chancellor would happen. When the revelation that Palpatine was the Sith Lord became public, the war basically ended immediately. All of this was a lot to take in. So Windu spoke before the Senate, explaining everything. How they infiltrated Dooku's castle, how they arrested the Sith Lord, how they discovered that Palpatine was Sidious, how they executed Order 99, and how the encrypted datapads they brought to Coruscant were now gone. It was suspected that someone very close to the Chancellor had taken care of the additional information, but it didn't really matter, because they already knew the most important truth. So it was decided that the entire office would be replaced. No Masameta, no sly Moore, no corrupt bureaucrats, only the elected Chancellor and his people. After hours of discussion, Bail Organa was declared the new Chancellor for the time being. Under his leadership, new laws and regulations took place. Battle droids were not to be attacked, except in self-defense. It was a gray area for many senators. Many droids stayed with the Separatist army, but a lot embraced peace. They weren't just the Separatist army anymore. They were soldiers with their own thoughts, spread across the galaxy, quintillions of them, everywhere. Droids were more like normal citizens now. They watched the HoloNet, strived for peace and diplomacy, and searched for their own purpose. The Separatist Senate was in ruins. Their army was gone. Dooku had been a Sith Lord working for Palpatine all along. They had been manipulated and abused. Many systems embraced diplomacy with the Republic, and there was no clear leadership in the Separatist Senate. This mess went on for over a year. As the galaxy began to settle down, the droids around the galaxy started to unify. Many simply roamed their planets, working in exchange for charging. Droids established movements aiming to gain citizenship rights. Most senators were skeptical. CIS droids were now found throughout the galaxy, on both Republic and Separatist worlds, even on Coruscant. So, mostly out of fear, the Senate elected to give droids fair representation. The droids weren't well organized, but the largest and most organized group, consisting of only 12 trillion battle droids, elected Coppertop as their representative. Coppertop was a highly respected B-1 battle droid. Droids figured he, as one of the most well-known droids in the galaxy, would be an appropriate leader to unite the droid nation. So Coppertop was granted a Senate pod. Coppertop was a special B-1 droid. He wore a majestic cape and had red stripes across his torso. He was known to be noble and fair. The Senate accepted him warmly, but something became obvious. Although the droid was good-natured, his programming wasn't exactly designed for politics. So a highly respected tactical droid was assigned to advise him. Coppertop remained the representative, but the tactical droid served as his advisor. Another droid was also given a seat, a B-2HA battle droid, who served more as a royal bodyguard, but his presence also represented a demand, fair representation for all droids. That would be difficult. There were so many different types of droids in the old army. Still, adding a super battle droid to the Senate was a good start, but internal issues plagued the droid faction, especially between B-1s and B-2s, the most numerous types. B-2s had a natural superiority complex. They were larger, equipped with integrated blasters, and had durasteel armor. Not to mention, their processing power was far greater. B-1s resented them. They remembered being smashed or thrown around by B-2s during wartime for nothing. Not to mention droidicas, whose superiority complexes made the B-2s look humble, but that was for the droids to figure out. Meanwhile, another massive problem was rising. Clone Trooper Legion still served the Republic. Their production had slowed dramatically, but as battle droids gained autonomy and rights, the clones grew impatient. They had fought and died to defeat the Clankers, their generals, their brothers, killed by them. And now these same droids were being given fair representation in the Senate, while they, the clones, still had no basic rights. They also felt betrayed by the Jedi. Why weren't they doing anything for them? The Senate didn't consider giving clones even basic rights or small pensions. Clones simply weren't seen as a threat. Battle droids were terrifying, unpredictable, way more numerous than clones, spread throughout every Republic world. No one knew what they'd do if denied what they wanted. Clones, on the other hand, were bred to serve the Republic. They weren't seen as dangerous. There was one Jedi who fought tirelessly for clone rights, Obi-Wan Kenobi. There were others, like Plo Koon and Skywalker, but Obi-Wan was the loudest. Through his friendship with Chancellor Organa, he often gained permission to speak at length in the Senate, urging justice for the clones. Organa supported Kenobi as much as he could. He was a fair man, but sadly, the Senate didn't care about justice when it meant spending large amounts of money on clones. That changed when the clones began rebel operations, not violent ones, but calculated actions to ensure their message, or rather their warning, was heard, and it was. So the clones were offered fair representation in the Senate, but they didn't care much for that. What they wanted was respect and basic rights, and soon they got it. They were granted small pensions and released from duty, though the majority chose not to retire. Instead, many became planetary security guards and peacekeepers. Overall, the Republic was now operating better than it had in a long time. This was as close to true democracy as they'd ever been, and it was mostly working. Anakin was soon granted the rank of Master. Maul was arrested. Ahsoka returned to the Order, and Luke and Leia were born, completely without complications. At the end, everything worked out mostly well for Anakin, and Padme as well. It was peaceful, at least until Palpatine somehow returned, yet again.